And we're back. I'm Bob Cusack with Mark Penn. Mark, you've got some fresh polling data, as we always do. What's the one word that summarizes it?
Oh, I'd say the word stable, meaning
Why is that?
Well, look, it's a divided country, unhappy with the economy, generally unhappy with the president. Generally, their attitudes really didn't change much this month. You could have looked at this poll, 2 months ago and gotten very similar responses. So I think that there's a certain stability of public opinion in the country, and the question is, what are the things that are going to shake it up, or maybe change it, as we start to head into the presidential election cycle.
We've had two really big news events recently. We had the ongoing saga for the search for the speaker. Kevin McCarthy finally won. I believe it was on the 15th vote, and it was quite dramatic. And then, so it was a very chaotic time for Republicans. And then what happens? Joe Biden and his lawyers, they find classified documents. What is the effect of both of those on the parties, or is really not much that you've seen so far?
Well, there are some effects underneath. I think first the actual speaker fight is a little bit more inside baseball. A lot of it happened at 1 a.m. And most voters, they didn't really focus on whether it was one ballot or 30 ballots. But I will say that I think one thing we see in the poll is that Kevin McCarthy is now seen as definitely not far right. I think the impact of the far right going after him was to position him more as a moderate and conservative, and not a far right crazy, which is frankly what the Republican Party needs more than anything else if it is to successfully improve its image. And you see the party actually ticked up 1 or 2 points in the poll to a 48% favorable among its highest. And most people thought Kevin McCarthy would actually negotiate with the Democrats. So whereas McConnell is seen as the ultimate partisan warrior, as Pelosi was, at least as Kevin McCarthy starts off here, he has an opportunity perhaps for more maneuverability. Perhaps the far right won't give him that maneuverability, but certainly I think he got off to a good start.
And it's going to be a tough job for McCarthy, even just passing a budget, which they're going to have to do as the first order of business. It's going to be challenging with their slim margins. The debt limit is front and center. Everyone's thinking about it. A lot of people are nervous about it because of that speaker fight in some ways. And basically, there are two talking points from both sides, one on each, where Republicans are saying, just come to the table and negotiate. And Democrats are saying, well, listen, we've raised the debt limit 78 times since 1960 with, no conditions. But your polling has 63% of people favor raising the debt ceiling, but with future spending restraints. I mean, that's a big advantage. I would imagine Republicans are going to cite that because that's key.
Yeah, I think we'll get a lot of publicity about this question. I was surprised how it came out. But I'm not surprised when you really examine the context. Most people think that what's happened in the last few years is that in response to COVID, the government spent too much money too fast. And that in general, a lot of big spending bills have been passed. So they think that that's also behind the inflation that they experienced. Given that context, you can understand why they would say, well, if the Republicans are going to use the debt ceiling to put some spending caps on, or maybe some kind of plan to move to a more balanced budget over 5 or 10 years, or some kind of restraints here on what they see as runaway spending. This is a unique moment. Of course, they don't want to see a default. They do think it would be a major issue, but they would actually like the Democrats to come to the table. And so we'll see who wins this fight, but it is not a sure thing that the Democrats can just sit there, do nothing, blame the Republicans, particularly not if the Republicans have some reasonable proposals for some spending caps.
Thinking back to last year, that a week before the election, we didn't know it, but Team Biden found at least the first batch of classified documents. Okay, fast forward Now we're in the new year, and the White House is still scrambling for a message on what happened, what are the documents, how many there are. We don't know. I mean, what do you make of all that? Because this is going to hang over the State of the Union to some degree, and also it's going to be a storyline when Biden, as expected, is going to announce his 2024 bid.
Well, I thought this fight over the classified documents would be a big nothing because, as I always say, like, we didn't create the espionage laws to entrap two presidents and a secretary of state. We created those laws to entrap, Russian and Chinese spies and people who were treasonous and selling out the United States. And that's not these people. So, like them or not. And so I'm a little surprised at how big this issue has become. I think Merrick Garland mistakenly made it a big issue. The way he treated Trump and the way he, sent the FBI and created special counsels. And obviously, if he knew then what he knows now, maybe he would have acted somewhat differently. Because the idea that we have two special counsels on this is quite crazy. But having said that, this turns out to be a far more damaging issue for Biden right now because of the way they've handled it. A huge majority thinks that if they discovered it in November, they should have told the country about it. They didn't fess up. They didn't even fess up 2 months later. It was a story broken by CBS News, a mainstream news outlet, which also is the reason because that the mainstream press has said, hey, we want the answers, who, what, when, where, why, what's going on here? And the White House, sending their lawyers to find more documents in different places. Well, they had 2 months to do that. Why didn't they do that during that 2 month period? What was going on? They had 2 months to get their story together. And instead, the press secretary says, oh, talk to the Justice Department, knowing that the only thing the Justice Department is going to say is no comment.
Right.
So
exactly.
To create that, it looks foolish. So I think that they've been lulled into complacency a bit because they've gotten away with this kind of response on a lot of issues. They didn't visit the border for years, claiming there's no border crisis and so forth. I mean, they've had that accepted, but this time it didn't work, right? And this time the mainstream media said, hey, tell us what's really going on here, and they haven't.
And on the presidential bid, I mean, if you really look at it, I mean, Trump has had a tough run. He's been saying some very controversial things, which he's always said about the Constitution, meeting with controversial people, to put it mildly. He was, according to your polling and others, the biggest loser of the midterm. And yet your polling shows him beating Biden, beating DeSantis, and beating Harris. Is the takeaway, don't count this guy out?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think he's done a bit of a comeback, less of his own making, and more, I think, of the mess that Biden created that managed to neutralize this whole issue. I'm a little surprised, Trump at 45, but look, when you look at horse races, and you look at people, Ron DeSantis now, on his favorable, unfavorable is plus 14 and still has a lot of the country yet to know who he is. Right. Everybody knows who Trump is. So Trump has every vote he is ever going to get. DeSantis is still in the vote gathering phase, getting his image out. So far, no one has been able to touch him. No one's found any, kindergarten drawings that they can haul out. I mean, I'm sure people are desperately looking for something on this guy,
right?
And they haven't found it. And so he remains the candidate of potential who has crept up month after month. If you take Trump out of the Republican nomination at this point, DeSantis, I think, gets like close to 49 without, just a huge lead over everybody else. On the Democratic side, Biden is limping along. Most Democrats don't support him for a second term, and there's no clear favorite. Kamala Harris has, about a quarter of the vote, but that's, again, not what I would consider a favorite. the way DeSantis has when you take Trump out, 49. So that's really getting up there in the preseason. So Trump's numbers are hard. I don't know that his potential is limited, but it still would be a kind of knockdown, drag-out fight here that would be pretty bloody if Trump and DeSantis go at it.
With your polling on the debt limit and most people thinking, yeah, we should, there should be some negotiation instead of just, moving a clean bill. It would seem to me that the White House would benefit from some type of negotiation and there is some type of deal. But the question is, who has the steering wheel in the Democratic Party? Is it going to be Joe Biden, or is it going to be Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries / Nancy Pelosi? What do you think of all that?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, the Trump administration, obviously, Manchin, the Treasury Secretary, played a unique role as the kind of economic negotiator, that would come in at critical moments. I'm not sure that there is anyone, because while Pelosi was there, Pelosi tended to kind of set the framework more so than the White House. And one of the gaps here has been the White House leadership in these things has been somewhat weak. And this is actually an ideal situation for the White House to triangulate a little bit, come in, negotiate with the Republicans, pull off a win, dramatically improve their ratings. And will that happen? We've seen Joe Biden go to the border. We've seen slight changes, but we haven't seen him come in and display that kind of flexible leadership that you really need. So I'd kind of rate this as 1/3 could be like deadlock chicken game, down to the end, and even with Janet Yellen playing whack-a-mole or what is it, the spin the plate game while this happens. And another thing will be a congressional compromise. Most likely these compromises tend to come in the Senate now, I think. And what should happen is, I think, as you point out, is particularly a president that wants to get reelected come in to serve leadership that and carve something out here. That's what President Clinton would have done.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like when you think back, and that's a good point you make about Janet Yellen. I'm not sure about her relationship with Kevin McCarthy, but McCarthy does not have much of a relationship with Biden. I imagine McCarthy and Yellen aren't drinking buddies, but Stephen Mnuchin, as you said, that he had a good relationship with Democrats, and who are going to be the key players is going to be fascinating. Looking forward to the upcoming State of the Union. I interviewed the D.C. Mayor Bowser, and she said, "Well, I really hope that the president leans into voting rights and D.C. statehood, which of course is not going to happen in this Congress with Republicans controlling the House." How do you see this State of the Union? What do you think he's going to do? Do you think he's going to pivot a little or a lot?
Well, the question is exactly how partisan will the State of the Union be, and the president, typically given the choice between moving to the center and staying Democratic line, straight up, has generally chosen Democratic line straight up. And, I don't know. Like I said, I think there was a mini pivot kind of going on. Again, do I think he's going to do what we did? Come out for a balanced budget, and the era of big government is over? No, I think he's going to come out with, the next big thing in climate change, and I think he's going to follow, equity, and I'm sure he'll mention DC statehood. I suspect he will come out somewhat more, straight down the Democratic line. After all, he's not scoring well enough in the Democratic primary to kind of, I think, abandon the coalition of him and Sanders and Warren, which really and Pelosi, that really has been his effective governing coalition. He has effectively been able to govern, on a partisan basis until now, And I just don't think we're going to see that change. I'd be delighted if we saw it, but I don't think they're going to see that as the imperative.
As far as likability, as we know, is very important, and you've mentioned something that I think is spot on. Is that as Biden has become president, gotten older, he's snapped at reporters, and you've said his appeal was being Uncle Joe. And now I think Ron DeSantis has some likability issues as well because people don't know him, and people need to like who you're voting for. And this classified document controversy is clearly going to be going on, and there's going to be reporters asking questions. Is that a danger for Biden to lose that kind of likability, Uncle Joe kind of feel?
Well, he's largely lost it. He used to have a personal rating. He and actually Bernie Sanders were people that you didn't necessarily agree with, but you kind of liked them anyway. Mm-hmm. And right now with a personal favorable of around 40, he's lost that whole Uncle Joe, have some ice cream with me kind of feel. Might not sit down with a beer, but definitely sit down with a cone. And now it's like, not going to answer that. It's, kind of very stiff, very almost curmudgeonly in response. And I think this, again, I think there's no answers to these simple questions about these documents. I think it's only reinforcing, this kind of, inwardness that I think that people see going on. So I do think that's been largely lost. It was a key part of his successful political image. We'll see if he can bring it back at all, but it would take a much friendlier State of the Union in order to bring that one back.
Absolutely. Last question. Anything I missed? Any closing thoughts?
No, I think that the one other thing that I find, puzzling is over the Hunter Biden, laptop stuff. That it's interesting. All parties pretty much say, look, this classified document stuff, it's got to be investigated. We need the answers to it. And it's interesting. I think that's a story that got out across all mediums in the same way. Maybe there were stories about how it's different from Trump or whatever, more on the Democratic side, but everybody got sort of the basic fact. Hunter Biden's story was never treated that way. Remember the 51, CIA, FBI, intelligence officers who said that it was Russian disinformation. A majority of Democrats, no matter how many mediums say that it is in fact a real laptop, still say it's Russian disinformation. Mm-hmm. That has stuck in the public, and it is a very big example of misinformation. And it's intriguing to me that it stays that way with so much of the Democratic electorate, even after major media have kind of admitted that that it is a real laptop. And so we'll see how the Republicans do on that. We'll see if the investigation seems too partisan, and we'll see. Look, the White House has indicated they're going to be very cooperative and answer absolutely nothing. And the Republicans are going to realize that they're going to get absolutely nothing from the White House or the Justice Department, and so they're going to see how they work around that. But I'm intrigued that how much partisanship there is around that. I think the University of Pennsylvania Center, is kind of being caught up in this, and people are beginning to suspect a bit of fishiness. I don't know what's going to happen with that ambassadorship for the University of Pennsylvania. So I think that the documents in an odd way are kicking up some of these other issues with Biden, and a lot of this will depend upon the real effectiveness of Jim Jordan. There is also a lot of interest in investigating the FBI connection to tech companies. That is a big issue. I think we had it in the previous poll, but there are a lot of people who are concerned about that and want to see that investigated. So people are looking for surprisingly like 2/3 of the country or like 4 investigations of basically all of this stuff. And we'll see what they get. They also have real problems. Majority of the people say that their economic conditions are worse off. And normally that would be the most important fact. Today, interestingly, people say, yeah, the economy's bad. I'm worse off. There's inflation. But what about these classified documents? So
Right.
they actually can be sort of distracted from the major issues in their life, which is maybe it's a phenomenon of the media and social media and the flow of information. But in the past, people would have been more singly minded on the issues that affect their everyday lives. Whether Joe Biden had classified documents in the garage or not going to make it easier to put a gallon of gas in your car.
Very true. It's going to be an exciting year with presidential announcements, State of the Union, the debt limit fight, and we'll be back with more polling, I'm sure, next month. And Mark, thank you as always.
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to the Hill's coverage of the battle over the debt ceiling.